Hi, I'm Heather.
I'm Haley.
And we're the Dunnit Sisters. This episode is on the death of Elizabeth Turek, who went by Sissy, and the disappearance of her daughter, Cheri Barnes. I've been in contact with Sissy's aunt, Pat, and her uncle, Carl, and they have given me everything they have on her case. And we need your help. Sissy's husband, Larry Vassar, is going to be released from prison in 5 years, and he's in prison on an unrelated charge. And what we're hoping is that the St. Louis Police Department and the DA open Sissy's case and file homicide charges before Larry's released from jail so that he doesn't do this again. And he will. Even though he may not physically be involved, he's the mastermind behind them. It's easy for us to pass judgment on Sissy and to be critical of her actions and her decisions, but unless you've been in an abusive relationship, you have no idea how much control these people have over you. We can Monday morning quarterback Sissy's decisions and her life, but I ask you to remember that she was a young victim and she deserves justice. So when Sissy's 18 years old, she meets Larry Vassar. Mm-hmm. And Larry Vassar had been in prison since he was 16 years old for armed robbery. Mm-hmm. So when he gets out of jail in 1986 or 85, he had just been out of jail for two months.
Okay.
And she meets him, and then a few months later they get married.
Okay.
And I believe that she was looking for a stepdad for Cherie, mm-hmm. but he's a monster. He's vile. He's violent.
How old was she at the time?
Sissy was 18.
Okay.
18, 19 years old when she meets him, and Cherie would have been a baby.
Okay.
Her daughter, Cherie.
And then he was then about her age, you're saying?
Like 24, 25 years old.
All right.
Okay, and just out of prison for armed robbery. When she meets him, Sissy was 4'8" and weighed less than 80 pounds.
Okay.
So she looked young, mm-hmm. and Larry began to prostitute her.
Okay.
And he found a clientele that was really interested in the young look.
Okay.
And she tried to get away from him numerous times, mm-hmm. and he would find her and he would beat her up.
Okay.
And one time he beat her up so bad, she was hospitalized. And so then Sissy's mom and her Aunt Pat, they go to the hospital and they bring Sissy and Cherie back to Aunt Pat's house.
Okay.
And they're giving Cherie a bath. And as they're bathing her, she starts screaming. So they take Cherie to the doctor and they find out that Larry has been molesting her, this 1-year-old child. So then Sissy's mom starts court proceedings to get custody of Cherie. Larry found them, and that is when he grabbed Sissy and Cherie and he moved them to Kansas City. Now,
and where? I'm sorry.
Nashville.
Nashville. Okay.
They lived in Nashville. Now, I would just like to say that before Larry moves them to Kansas City, he masterminds the retaliation against Sissy's family. And what he does is Larry had like a prostitution ring going on in Nashville. Mm-hmm. He gets one of his prostitutes and her boyfriend to kidnap Sissy's grandma, her mom's mom, okay? Apparently, the mom was set to inherit $1 million when the grandma passes away.
Okay.
So he gets them to kidnap that 78-year-old woman. Uh-huh. They beat her with a tire iron, and they put her in the back of the car, and the prostitute and the boyfriend are driving around the city trying to cash checks in her name. And after 10 hours of driving her around, they dispose of her body in a river. The thing is she doesn't die.
Wow.
She's alive. And she's able to ID the prostitute who she recognized from kind of knowing Sissy. Mm-hmm. So the prostitute and her boyfriend get attempted murder charges put against them and they go to jail.
Okay, good.
So because of Larry's And they don't
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Okay, no, they don't name Larry. No, they don't name Larry. But because of this and the molestation charges, Larry takes Sissy and Cherie and they move to Kansas City in October of 86. Okay? So in October of 86, Larry, Sissy, and Cherie are living in Kansas City and they live in a house on Vine. And which is less than a mile away from Independence Avenue, where anyone who lives in Kansas City knows that then Larry puts Sissy back on the streets prostituting. Okay.
And probably the little girl.
You know what? I don't know, but that wouldn't surprise me. This guy is a nasty piece of work.
Yeah.
He really is nasty. He's actually disgusting. So, which is why we want to put him back in jail. He gets out in 5 years. Okay, but we'll get to all that. Okay, so Sissy calls home in December of 86, and she tells her family that she and Cherie are coming home for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
She never comes home. Now, we know that at some point at the end of December, Sissy gets away from Larry. Okay? And we know this because in January of 87, so just a few weeks later, he and 3 other men break into an apartment of a friend of Sissy's.
Okay.
So armed robbery, looking for her. And they're wanting to know where Sissy is. She's not there. So he kidnaps one of the women who lives in the apartment. I know, right? This guy is a piece of work. And takes them back to his house on Vine. Mm-hmm. Now, fast forwarding it. 8 years later, and we'll get into that. 8 years later, when the police are interviewing that woman, she says Cherie was in the house. Okay. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because January 7th, 1987 is the last known sighting of Cherie. Okay, that's just important. So the woman gets free and Larry gets arrested, but he's released because, you have to go to court and trial and stuff. So he's released. Now, in February 4th, 1987, 1 month later, a fisherman finds the naked body of a female in the Mississippi River in St. Louis. They do an autopsy. According to her autopsy report, her death is ruled drowning by undetermined means, and they believe that she'd only been dead for up to 3 days. The police made a reconstruction sketch of her face, and it was released in Missouri newspapers. And the body is unidentified, and it's buried in a pauper grave in a St. Louis cemetery. Meanwhile, the charges against Larry for the armed robbery when he broke into the friend of Sissy's,
right?
They charge him with as a repeated offender. The kidnapping charges are dropped.
Wait, do you know what year this is?
87.
This is still 87?
Still 87. Oh. So in 87, they take him to court. He's charged with as a repeated offender, and he gets 40 years, which is why he is going to be released in 2028. Okay.
So 40 years for armed robbery.
Armed robbery repeated, but not for the attempted, or not for the kidnapping. That was not. Yeah, they dropped that.
I wonder if she didn't want to press. Well, the states usually do.
I don't know. I thought
made a deal.
Larry tells his probation officer that this is the same while he's being charged or going to prison. He tells his probation officer that his wife has been strangled, and that his stepdaughter Cherie is living with her relatives in Nashville. Now, the probation officer doesn't look into this like, oh, you've got a dead wife out there, murdered.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, there's no investigation into that. And he doesn't ID her. He knows that she's been murdered, and he doesn't ID the body that was found in St. Louis.
It kind of fell through the cracks. Because why would he? I mean...
But if he's innocent, I just see, if you're innocent, oh, that's my wife. Baby, darling, I love you. What happened? I don't know. That bothers me, So Larry writes Sissy's grandma, the same grandma that he tried to have killed.
Mm-hmm.
He writes her a letter, and in this letter he says, Sissy's been strangled. I didn't do it. But I feel responsible because of the lifestyle that I've made her live. But if you give me money, I will give you photographs of Cherie and you can have her back. But don't tell the police. This is not a ransom note. P.S. Can I have a TV? So nothing comes of that. And by the way, and her family doesn't even know they don't have no reason to think that she's dead. So this is like, wait, what are you talking about? So.
Did they know he was even in jail at that point?
Because he wrote him from jail.
Yeah, but that's when they first found out.
Yeah, okay. They get this letter from Larry in jail, and he's like, your daughter's been strangled. So Sissy's mom, meanwhile, is trying to start a missing persons report on their daughter. So she calls the Nashville police first. She contacts them, and they're like, well, she's married, and she can come and go as she pleases. So then Aunt Pat is writing letters, which she wrote letters to the Kansas City Police Department. She's told them, I hear that, there's a strangled, body. I'm looking for my niece, she's missing, her daughter's missing. They do this for years, okay? And obviously they don't go anywhere with this. Never once thinking there's any reason that she would be in St. Louis. Because why would she be in St. Louis?
Didn't you say that you got the case file?
Yes, I have the case file.
Does it say, it probably doesn't say anything about letters or anything like that, does it?
I have copies of the letters they wrote. They wrote them. They really did write these letters. Is that what you mean?
No, I think that.
Oh,
I just
yes.
didn't think that it would be in the file to show that, hey, we got these letters, but we didn't do anything with them.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
No, these are their personal files that they have.
Oh,
copies of
for some reason
there's
they
a
got a
police.
hold of the case file.
There's no case file because it's not a homicide, right? She died. She drowned from undetermined means. There's no investigation. No, that's the problem. They never investigated her. She's just a dead prostitute, right? I mean,
but
no.
how will they? Oh, I guess because they finally. Okay, go ahead. Because I don't even got.
No, it's okay. See, this is why I like doing this. Haley doesn't know this. I'm telling you guys, and I'm telling her because then she asks questions like you guys would do, like, "Wait, what?"
Because then I skip to
the end.
Yeah, so
you're skipping to the end.
The part where they somehow find out that that's her.
She gets identified. Yes, thank you, Aunt Pat. Yes. Well, she's not my Aunt Pat. I don't need to keep calling her that. She might be like, girl. Okay, so in 1994, so it's been 7 years, one of Sissy's aunts is living in Alaska. And she comes across an old St. Louis newspaper that has a reconstruction drawing, and there's another drawing, a reconstruction drawing of this woman who had been found in a river in 1987, and calls the St. Louis police and saying, my niece is missing, and sends them her dental records and her fingerprints records, and she's identified as Sissy. If it weren't for Aunt Pat, Sissy would still be in an unmarked grave in St. Louis.
But wait, it wasn't the one in Alaska? I'm pointing like.
Well, yes, that sister's passed away. But yes, if it weren't for her,
That's crazy.
Sissy is identified, and she's exhumed, and she's brought back home to Nashville. And that is when they're like, where's Cherie? Not the family. The family's been trying to look for all these years. But now the police are interested. They're like, oh, there's a missing girl who would now be 10 years old. Where's Cherie? So the police go to Larry, who's in prison for the armed robbery. And they're like, found your wife. And he's like, I didn't do it. I didn't kill her. I don't know who killed her. And Cherie is with my relatives, his relatives, and they've changed her name. And I'm not telling you where she is. So he's told many different stories of where Cherie is. First it was Sissy's family who never had her. Now it's his family who has her. And they checked all his family members and nobody has her. At least they can't find her. And he's also given stories that it's somebody he knows, but it's always been, they've changed her name. They changed her name and you're not going to find her. So that's what happens when they contact Larry. Larry tells them all this. And then that is when they found out about the kidnapping charge in Kansas City. And that's when they interviewed that woman who was friends with Sissy. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I saw Cherie on January 7th. So that's how that part comes around. And then after the interview, Larry writes Sissy's family a letter and says that if he sends them money, he'll give them a recording of Cherie's voice. Sissy's family visit Larry in prison, and he won't talk to them. He acts like he doesn't even know who they are. And he knows who they are because Sissy and Cherie lived with them. He tells Sissy's family that they won't hear from Cherie until 2002 when she's 18 years old. Well, that never happened. I mean, they've never heard from Cherie. Okay. I can't tell you enough how hard Sissy's Aunt Pat tried to get law enforcement involved in Sissy and Cherie's case before they even knew that Sissy was dead. And if it weren't for her, Sissy would still be in an unmarked grave in St. Louis. But because of Aunt Pat, Sissy's now resting in a cemetery in Nashville with her other family members. Sissy's back home. And so I think it's really important that we try to bring Cherie back home. So let's talk about the whodunits. I would like to start, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. I would like to start with the autopsy report. The reason it took so long for us to end up filming this episode is because I looked at this autopsy report for a week. I had a biologist look at this autopsy report too. And it's troubling. And I want to talk to you about it, and we'll explain why. Okay. First, I want to say that Sissy had no transportation. So I don't believe that she walked to St. Louis, took off her clothes, and threw herself into the Mississippi River. I can tell you that. I know I believe that.
I agree with that.
Okay. So they believe that she was dead for no more than 3 days. Okay. According to her autopsy report, there was no froth coming out of her mouth. Mm-hmm. There was no water or silt, like river water or the silt and sand that's in there. There was no water or silt, river water in her esophagus, in her sinuses, in her sinus cavities, in her lungs, in the lung sac surrounding the lungs, or in her stomach.
No river water in any of that?
No, there's no.
So where they come up with the drowning?
She had enlarged lungs. Her lungs were enlarged, and that is a sign of drowning. But you know what else it's a sign of? Severe stress. Severe stress can cause pulmonary edema. Also, her kidneys, her spleen, and her liver were enlarged. They weighed more than what's normal, typical, and it was especially heavy for someone with her weight, 78 pounds, and her size. And what makes the kidneys and liver and spleen heavy is asphyxiation. That can make those organs.
Well, he did say
she was strangled. Now, her hyoid bone was intact, but it doesn't always break, because when you have someone who's 78 pounds, you don't have to really apply a lot of pressure. But he said she was strangled. He could have said, just kill her, and assumed it was strangulation, and they could have put a bag over her head. They could have suffocated her. I think she was nabbed in Kansas City. I think she was put in a trunk because that's what they did to Grandma. I think she was driven with her in the trunk, it's my theory, to St. Louis. She was under duress. Her nails had been bitten down. She had bit her nails down. And in the autopsy, there's no food. There's nothing in her stomach, and that includes food. There's no food. There was no urine in her bladder. Now, I compared her autopsy report to known drowned victims, people who had like fallen in a river and drowned. And not only did they have water either in the lungs or in the sac of the lungs, but they still had, minuscule amount of urine in their bladder. Mm-hmm. She didn't have any. So I don't think she'd had anything to eat or drink. Right. There's no alcohol and there were no drugs in her system. I think she was severely stressed. She was suffocated. And then I think she was thrown into the river just like they did to Grandma, except she wasn't hit with the tire iron.
I mean, if she was just kept in the trunk the whole time.
She may be suffocated. The thing is the point is we may not know exactly how she died. Someone needs to open it up. They have to want to open up. They need to look at this. And I am...
So that somehow someone needs to bring it up to the attention of someone to bring to the DA to switch it over?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly. We have 5 years to build a case against Larry. But he has done things like that before. And he has been known to have prostitutes do his work because why St. Louis? Larry had family in St. Louis. Okay, I wondered, why would they take her to St. Louis?
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Larry had family in St. Louis. He could have had a family member drive her out there.
So did anyone even really check if the daughter's not with Larry's family? I mean, is that for sure?
The detective who had the case on Cherie said that she was not found with family members. Yes. And he's retired now. Someone else, he's not in charge of it now. But Sissy's ID was found with a prostitute who moved to Texas. I know her name. I'm not going to tell you her name. So how did she get Sissy's ID?
Where'd that come from?
What do you mean?
I mean, where'd that information come from?
From the file that I have. Police found out. Police did. Okay. Because when they ID'd Sissy, they're like, oh, but someone with Sissy's name is living in Texas. So they find her and they're like, oh, she used to be a prostitute who had connections to Larry. But that's as far as that went.
No questions asked?
I don't know. That could be something that we just don't know. But I would tell you that how did she get a dead woman's ID? I would like to know I don't know she didn't have anything to do with it. I don't. I don't know that she didn't have anything to do with it. But
she didn't have anything to do with the grandmother being...
No, that wasn't that woman. That woman actually is dead. That woman, when she got released from prison, she was murdered. But not by Larry. And I didn't mean to smile. That wasn't nice. So that's what the ID, that's why it all goes back to Larry. Prostitution ring. A prostitute has the ID of Sissy. The St. Louis tie. Cherie. So where's Cherie? I don't know if he sold her. I don't know if he killed her. I can tell you that the house on Vine has been torn down and there's apartments. So if he would have buried her in the backyard, they would have found her. I think that Cherie could be alive. She could be.
Going under a different name. She could be a prostitute.
She could be a prostitute. She could have been sold. She could have been killed.
Do they have any records of her, fingerprints or DNA or anything?
There's DNA. The DNA would be from her aunt and a cousin of Sissy's. I will tell you this. In 1989, the skeleton of a biracial child was found in a suitcase in Glasgow, Kentucky, which is an hour and a half away from Nashville. In 1989. The luggage, the suitcase that she was found in, family members say looks remarkably like suitcases that Grandma had. Okay. Now, the skull was crushed. The skull was crushed. She was murdered. Now, which is, again, the same MO. Larry loves rivers. Let me tell you what. Anyway, the family was told that was not Cherie. But They didn't have DNA from the family members until 94. So the family is wondering if they compared the DNA to Larry, because if so, it wouldn't match. He's not her dad; it's his stepdad. And I emailed the Kentucky medical examiner, and she never got back with me. So that is a very good question. I would like to think that they would relook into that to see if this child is in fact Cherie. Who do you think did it? What's your whodunit theory?
It's funny how most of our whodunit theories that seem to be the same, because you're right. Sounds like it could be Larry, or it could have been a John. But more likely, since Larry had family in St. Louis, I wonder why he went over there, though.
I wondered if they might have moved her there to make it harder to ID. Because if she would have been found in Kansas City, I think she could have been ID'd faster. Or quicker, I mean.
I'm thinking Larry. Or I was going to say a John, but I don't see how that's possible. Larry. And then Cherie, she could still be alive since she was last seen, you said, on January 7th.
January 7th, 1987 was the last sighting of Cherie.
And Sissy wasn't there.
Sissy was not there. So she was still around, obviously, in January. I mean, I think he found her. I think he went to jail briefly after the kidnapping and the armed robbery. I think he was released until he went to trial for the robbery. And during that time, I think she was caught or found. But I think that he
was angry enough to do what he did.
He told the people, his people, what to do, and or maybe even a family member of his. And yes, they drove her to St. Louis.
Could have been the girl with the ID.
With the ID. I mean, that's what happened last time. I think he might have said so and so.
They never asked the question, like, do you know Larry? Is this girl still alive?
I probably. Apparently, she's turned her life around, but didn't turn it around enough to not use someone else's ID. Yes. But I would think that, going by his MO, that yes, he probably said, you get your boyfriend, you take care of Sissy, would be my guess.
Or he was just that mad.
Or that mad, and he did it, because again, St. Louis got family members.
Yeah,
and he was mad. She was going to leave him. She was going to leave him because she knew he tried to kill her grandma. And by then she knew he was molesting her daughter.
In St. Louis with his family. Maybe she was just trying to get help from someone and living with
something. But yes, we are pleading that somebody please help get this case moving before he gets out, because he's an evil person and he'll do things like this again. And he's a pedophile. He's a pedophile. He's a nasty piece of work. And this family needs justice. It's been a long, long time. 1987. Her Aunt Pat and her Uncle Carl and a cousin. She has a half brother. That's all that's left. That's all that's left of Sissy's and Cherie's. And, even if they found out Cherie's alive and she's doing well, that would be, they just want to know. Mm-hmm. But getting, Sissy's death investigated would be wonderful.
Did you mention, did you mention who her dad was? Not Sissy, Cherie?
I did not mention. He's on her birth certificate, but he was living in California when she went missing. He would have had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Just curious.
What is our next case going to be on?
Hopefully on Damien Norfleet. Yes. Well, I could maybe have a Zoom meeting.
Zoom or phone call meeting with his parents.
Yes.
That would be wonderful. Thank you very much. Please subscribe to our channel. Any feedback, we'd love to hear comments. Listen to our podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.